Imagine finding out that the person who designed your bank's high security vault was actually a convicted bank robber.
Which is just, I mean, a wild thought.
Right. And now imagine the bank being so incredibly proud of this guy that they decide to honor him by putting his face right there on the money itself.
Yeah, it sounds completely absurd, like a joke.
It really does. But the crazy thing is, in 1966, Australia did exactly that.
They absolutely did. And honestly, it speaks volumes about how a nation chooses to view its own history because, we treat physical money as this pure utility, just a quick vehicle to buy a coffee or whatever.
And we almost never actually look at it.
Exactly. We just hand it over.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dives. We're looking at a massive encyclopedic breakdown, specifically a Wikipedia article of a seemingly mundane, everyday object, the Australian $10 note.
Yes.
And by the time we are done here, you, the listener, are going to realize that the crumpled piece of cash in your pocket isn't just, a medium of exchange. It is a highly dense, miniature museum exhibit.
Oh, without a doubt.
It's documenting a nation's history, its technological breakthroughs, and some surprisingly heavy cultural and legal controversies.
It really is a masterclass in design and engineering. And, human psychology, too, because money is essentially a fiction.
Right, it only works if we believe it.
Exactly. Fiat currency only has value because we all collectively agree to trust it. So the physical object itself has to constantly reinforce that trust.
And to see how they built that trust, we really have to rewind to a massive shift in Australian history. February 14th, 1966.
A huge day.
Yeah, this was the day Australia transitioned its entire currency system from the old British-style pound to the new decimal dollar. And the new $10 note was brought in to replace the old £5 note.
Right.
But the designers did something incredibly clever to stop people from just panicking. They kept the exact same blue coloration from the old £5 note for the new $10 note.
Which is a deeply vital psychological anchor. Yeah. I mean, you have to imagine the sheer anxiety of a whole country waking up to find that the basic math of their daily survival has completely changed.
Yeah, it must have been terrifying for some people.
Oh, absolutely. An economy is incredibly fragile on a day like that. So by keeping that familiar blue hue, the central bank was essentially, holding the public's hand.
Like a comfort blanket.
Yeah, exactly. It subconsciously signaled to a nervous shopkeeper or a skeptical buyer, yes, the numbers are different, but this still holds the same value. This is still your money. It drastically lowered the cognitive load of the whole transition.
Okay, let's unpack this because the first batch of these paper notes, the characters they chose to represent this brand new Australian decimal identity are just wild.
They really are.
So initially, the main title identifying the country was printed as Commonwealth of Australia. And that was from 1966 until 1974 before they decided to shorten it to just Australia.
Right, and they printed a staggering amount of them. Over 1.2 billion of those Australian notes were printed up until 1993.
Wow, 1.2 billion.
Yeah, and when you have a print run that massive early anomalies become incredibly rare and valuable to collectors, like the source notes that the 1967 issue featuring the specific signatures of Coombs and Wilson is highly sought after.
Just because of the signatures?
Mostly because it was only issued for one single year, so it's super rare now.
That makes sense. But I want to get back to the faces on these original paper notes, though, because this is where it gets crazy to me. So on the reverse side, you have the famous poet Henry Lawson.
Right.
And he's surrounded by scenes of a 19th century outback gold mining town called Goolgong. It's got the Times Bakery. It's very rustic, very grounded.
Very classic Australiana.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But on the front, the obverse side, you have the architect Francis Greenway alongside some of the public buildings he helped construct. And here is the kicker. Francis Greenway was a previously convicted forger. I cannot get over this. They put a convicted forger on their legal tender. That is a hilarious irony. It's literally like hiring a known bank robber to design your vault and then immortalizing him on the cash itself. Why would they do that?
What's fascinating here is that it's an absolutely brilliant, confident move for a newly decimalized nation.
You think so?
Oh, definitely. In a lot of cultures, a criminal past is seen as a permanent stain. It's something to be buried, scrubbed from the official record.
Right, you wouldn't brag about it?
Exactly. But highlighting Greenway, a man who was literally transported to Australia as a convict for forgery and then rose to become this foundational architect, it reflects a very unique cultural mindset.
Ah, I see.
It is an embrace of the convict past rather than a denial of it. It's an acknowledgement that the nation was built by people seeking or, well, being forced into a second chance.
That makes so much sense. It's almost a badge of honor, in a way.
It really is.
But relying on national pride and a familiar blue color isn't going to be enough to secure an economy. They had to actually protect the paper.
Right. Right, the anti-counterfeiting measures.
Yeah, so the design included a watermark of Captain James Cook in the Whitefield. And that was the exact same watermark used in the last issue of the old pound banknotes.
Exactly. And again, that goes right back to continuity. So a watermark is created during the actual paper-making process.
Oh, really? Not printed on later?
Nope. It's by varying the thickness of the paper while it's still wet. So when you hold it up to the light, the thinner parts let more light through, and that creates an image.
That's super clever.
Yeah, and if someone was nervous about accepting this new, unfamiliar dollar, holding it up to the light and seeing the familiar, embedded face of Captain Cook, it provided immediate physical proof of legitimacy.
Like, okay, this is real money.
Exactly. And they also introduced a metallic security strip woven directly into the paper. Initially, it was placed near the center of the note, and then in 1976, they moved it over to the left side.
Right. But as much character as those poacher notes had, and as clever as a moving metallic strip was, they had one massive inherent vulnerability.
They were paper.
They were made of paper. They tear, they absorb water, they wear out in your pocket.
Oh, yeah.
And worse, as we get into the 1980s, paper became incredibly vulnerable to a new technological enemy, the color photocopier.
Yes. That was a game changer for counterfeiters.
Which brings us to 1988, where Australia completely reinvents the physical nature of money.
This is a monumental leap. I mean, not just for Australia, but for the history of global currency. It was this desperate arms race against counterfeiters.
So to celebrate the bicentennial of Australian settlement in 1988, the country printed 17.5 million commemorative $10 notes.
Right.
And this wasn't just, a new picture on the same old paper. This was the first polymer plastic banknote of its kind anywhere in the world.
A total world first.
On the front, it featured the HMS Supply anchored at Sydney Cove, early colony backgrounds, and figures symbolizing everyone who contributed to Australia, from early settlers to the modern working man. And it also featured a brand new security feature called an optically variable device, or OVD. And this showed Captain James Cook, who, the text notes, was the man who first mapped Botany Bay.
Right. Another nod to history.
But I have to push back a bit here because I have to admit, my first instinct when reading this was that it was just a massive marketing stunt.
Really?
Yeah. Like, why roll out a brand new one-first plastic technology just for a commemorative note? Was this just a flashy bicentennial gimmick to show off? Releasing a totally untested currency substrate just seems insanely risky for a national economy.
Well, it's a very logical suspicion, but it was absolutely not a stunt. Developing a polymer substrate for currency was a grueling, highly expensive research project.
Okay.
The Reserve Bank had actually been working on this for years to combat those high-resolution color copiers we just talked about. So by introducing it as a commemorative issue, they essentially tricked the public into participating in a massive, real-world beta test.
A beta test with 17.5 million notes.
Precisely. They needed to test the waters. Like, how does plastic hold up in a humid climate? Does the ink rub off when it's just crumpled up in a wallet?
Oh, sure.
And how do mechanical ATMs handle the friction of a polymer bill? If the experiment failed, they could just write it off as a limited-run commemorative item.
Right. It was just for the bicentennial.
Exactly. But if it succeeded, it would prove that this groundbreaking technology was the future of economic security.
That is so smart. Now, you mentioned the OVD of Captain Cook. What exactly is an optically variable device, and why is it better than the old paper security?
So think of it like a highly advanced hologram. It's a structure stamped into a foil at a microscopic level that physically diffracts light.
Okay.
As you tilt the banknote, the image of Captain Cook actually appears to move or change colors. And a color photocopier, it just takes a static, two-dimensional snapshot.
So it can't capture the movement.
It fundamentally cannot replicate a physical structure that requires actual movement and light to function. That, combined with the polymer itself, completely neutralized the color copier threat.
Wow. So the technology was a spectacular success. But while the material of the note was celebrating modern tech, and the front of the note was celebrating colonial history, the back of the 1988 note triggered a profoundly complex legal and cultural clash,
Yes, it really did.
one that went all the way to the federal court.
Yeah, the technological triumph was, for a time, deeply overshadowed by a landmark conversation about intellectual property and cultural rights.
So the reverse side of that 1988 commemorative note was designed to reflect Aboriginal culture. It featured an Aboriginal youth in ceremonial paint named Wayne Williams, alongside a Dreamtime figure.
Right.
And it also featured a very specific piece of artwork, a Morning Star pole created by an artist named Terry Yumbulu. But after the note was released into circulation, Yumbulu actually sued the Reserve Bank for breach of copyright.
Yes.
He claimed that an agent had misled and deceived him into permitting the reproduction of his pole.
And to understand the true weight of this lawsuit, you really have to look beyond standard copyright law and understand the cultural context. According to the sources, a Morning Star pole is profoundly culturally significant to the Galpu clan. Terry Yumbul had the right to physically make the pole, yes, but that right came with a very strict communal obligation.
Meaning he didn't just own it outright himself.
Exactly. He was obligated to his clan to ensure that the pole was not used or reproduced in any way that offended their cultural perceptions of its significance.
So what does this all mean? The case played out, and the Reserve Bank ended up settling their part of the lawsuit. But the claim against the agent who obtained the approval went to trial.
Right.
And Justice Robert French ruled that the copyright was validly assigned and that the agent hadn't engaged in misleading or deceptive conduct.
Yes.
But the judge also explicitly acknowledged that Yumbul may not have fully appreciated the implications of what he was doing in terms of his own cultural obligations. I really struggle to wrap my head around this. Wait, so the court said the contract was legally solid, but culturally it might have been a violation of his obligation to the Galpu clan. How do you reconcile a legal signature with indigenous communal ownership?
This raises an important question, and you've hit on exactly why this case is so historically important. It's a collision between two entirely different paradigms of viewing the world.
Okay, how so?
Well, on one side, you have Western intellectual property law. It's highly individualistic, right? It assumes that a solitary genius artist creates a work, owns the copyright, signs a piece of paper, and sells the rights.
Right. You sign the contract, you get the check, it's done. A simple binary transaction.
Exactly. But indigenous cultural rights operate on a deeply communal level. The art isn't just an aesthetically pleasing image. It can be a sacred text, a record of lineage, and a profound responsibility shared by an entire clan over generations.
Wow.
The artist is more of a steward than a sole proprietor.
So signing away the reproduction rights on a standard, Western legal contract fundamentally fails to account for the spiritual or communal permissions required by the clan.
Precisely. And the judge's ruling really reflects the strict limitations of the Western legal framework. The contract was legally sound by the letter of the law, but it completely failed to capture the cultural reality of what was being traded.
That's a massive blind spot.
It is. But what is truly noteworthy here is that the Reserve Bank chose to settle the case rather than fight it to the bitter end.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that settlement was an institutional recognition of the gravity of the situation. It's a powerful lesson that basic legal compliance doesn't automatically equate to cultural respect. It really forced institutions to realize that when dealing with indigenous art, a standard copyright clearance simply isn't enough.
That is such a heavy, fascinating layer hidden on the back of a plastic beta test note.
It really is.
And the Reserve Bank clearly learned from the trials of 1988 both the technological successes of the polymer and the cultural lessons of the design process. Because they took all of that data and synthesized it to create the permanent polymer $10 notes that we actually see today.
Yes.
And from 1993 onward, they transformed the note into a highly secure, literary masterpiece.
The shift from the commemorative note to the permanent circulation note is where you really see this technology mature from an experiment into a true art form.
So the permanent polymer note, which was designed by Max Robinson and issued from 1993 all the way to 2017, took a beautifully poetic turn. On the obverse, you have A.B. Banjo Patterson, who is one of Australia's most famous bush poets.
Right.
And alongside him is a horse in the Snowy Mountains region, a wattle plant, and his signature. Then on the reverse, you have Dame Mary Gilmore, another iconic Australian writer and journalist, alongside a bullock train and her signature. But the craziest part is the background. The backgrounds of both sides actually feature tiny microprinted verses from the respective poetry.
It's an incredible fusion of national identity and security.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. In 2017, they updated the design again. They kept the poetic themes, but added the bramble wattle and the sulfur-crested cockatoo.
Yeah, beautiful additions.
And they added a massive top-to-bottom transparent window. I was looking at the design specs for this 2017 note, and the security features are just wild. You have embossing, literally a raised image inside that clear window.
Right.
There's a shadow image of the coat of arms printed over the note. The serial numbers are printed with fluorescent ink. And they kept the microprinting of the entire poem, The Man from Snowy River, and the denomination value.
That's a lot of features.
It's essentially a high-tech literary magazine hidden in your wallet. But I have to ask, isn't that overkill? Why go to the immense trouble of microprinting whole poems? Who is actually reading their money with a magnifying glass?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the overkill is exactly the point. When it comes to currency, complexity is the security.
Oh, I see.
Remember the color photocopier threat. When a counterfeiter tries to scan or photocopy a modern banknote, their digital scanners are calibrated to look for standard resolutions. Microprinting is so infinitesimally small that a standard optical scanner simply cannot resolve the individual letters.
So the scanner basically just gives up and renders it as a solid blurry line.
Exactly. It completely breaks the digital reproduction process. And you mentioned the embossing on the transparent window.
Yeah, the raised bump.
That is another physical hurdle. Polymer is essentially a specialized plastic film. Embossing it means applying extreme mechanical pressure to physically deform that film, which creates a raised, tactile texture.
Right.
So a visually impaired person can feel it, an automated cash sorting machine can feel it, but a counterfeiter with a high-end inkjet printer absolutely cannot print physical depth.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. But my absolute favorite feature has to be the stars.
Oh, the registration stars.
Yes. There is a 4-point star printed on the front of the note and a 3-point star printed on the back.
Yeah.
And when you hold the bill up to the light, they magically join together to form a perfect 7-pointed star. How do they even do that on a mass scale?
That is called perfect registration, and it is a counterfeiter's absolute nightmare.
Really? Why?
To achieve that, the printing plates on the front and the back of the printing press have to hit the fast-moving plastic substrate at the exact same millisecond in perfect microscopic alignment.
Wow.
Yeah. If a counterfeiter tries to fake it by running a sheet of plastic through a printer once for the front and then flipping it over to print the back, the microscopic slip of the paper feed will ruin the alignment. If they're off by even a fraction of a millimeter, that star won't line perfectly when you hold it up to the light.
That is just brilliant. So how many of these little plastic canvases are actually out there in the wild right now?
Well, according to the June 2017 statistics in the source material, there were 128 million $10 notes in circulation. That represents a net value of $1.28 billion, and it makes up about 8% of all banknotes in circulation.
So they are absolutely everywhere, passing from hand to hand every single second, and surviving the elements perfectly thanks to that polymer.
Exactly.
It really is an incredible journey. I mean, we started with a paper note in 1966 that literally featured a convicted forger, a confident nod to a complex colonial past.
Yep.
Then we witnessed a massive world-first pivot to polymer technology in 1988, which brought with it a landmark dispute that forced a reckoning between Western copyright law and ancient indigenous cultural rights.
A huge cultural milestone.
And finally, we arrived at today's modern $10 note, a micro-printed, fluorescent, perfectly aligned celebration of national poetry that is practically impossible to forge.
It just goes to show that a nation's currency is never just about economics. It is a constantly evolving self-portrait. Every time they update the security, they're also updating how they tell their own story.
So to you listening, the next time you pull a piece of cash out of your wallet or purse, take a second to actually look at it. Because those seemingly boring items we carry every day are deeply layered with human stories, legal battles, and cutting-edge engineering.
They really are miniature museums.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. If you were tasked to design a banknote to represent your own community today, what controversial detail or cultural watermark would you include that historians might be arguing about 50 years from now? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you buy that coffee, remember you're holding a miniature museum in the palm of your hand.